Welcome back to the Satoshi Chain podcast. We got to dive into this question again. Is Bitcoin just a greater fool game? It's this idea that the price goes up not because it's actually worth more, because people think they can sell it for even more to someone else, someone even more optimistic, maybe. We've got some stuff to unpack here. You sent in this YouTube transcript, and the author, they really go after that whole greater fool theory. So we're bringing in this philosopher, Karl Popper, and his idea of falsifiability. Basically, falsifiability means a theory can only be scientific if there's some evidence out there that could prove it wrong. Like, imagine someone says all swans are white. Okay, well, all it takes is one black swan to prove them wrong. Right. But how does this apply to, like, Bitcoin and this greater fool idea? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. And to help us navigate this whole thing, we've got our expert with us. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, this idea of falsifiability, it gets pretty tricky when you're talking about financial markets. It's not like you can run a controlled experiment, like you can with those swans you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we even, test this greater fool theory when we're talking about something like Bitcoin?
Well, I think it comes down to looking for evidence that would actually contradict the theory. So if Bitcoin's price is only going up because of speculation, right, just this hope of finding someone a greater fool to buy it off of you, then theoretically there shouldn't be any other factors affecting its price.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So what kind of evidence would, challenge that idea?
Well, imagine if, let's say, businesses start accepting Bitcoin, like left and right, but not because they think it'll make them a quick buck, but because they actually see it as, a useful way to do business. Like that would suggest there's something more to it than just, crazy speculation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if suddenly everyone's using seashells to trade, there's got to be a reason beyond just finding someone with a bigger shell collection, right?
Exactly. Or what if you see developers building like really cool stuff on top of the Bitcoin network? Things that actually solve real problems, That would kind of suggest it's more than just speculation, right?
Okay, so we're looking for signs that Bitcoin has value beyond just hoping to sell it at a higher price, which brings us back to that YouTube transcript you sent in. The author, they seem pretty skeptical of this whole greater fool argument when it comes to Bitcoin. So where do they start with their critique?
Well, they point out how someone calls Bitcoin a super scam right away. But even that person, they admit it's the first super scam they've ever seen, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I get it. It's like, if it's the first of its kind, how can you even define what makes it a super scam?
Right. It's almost like they're just throwing that label out there without any, clear criteria or evidence.
Yeah.
And if you can't define what makes something a scam, how can you even test that claim?
So the author is saying just using terms like super scam without any real substance behind it, that's kind of intellectually lazy, maybe even disingenuous.
Exactly. It's like yelling fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire, It causes chaos, but there's no real danger.
So flimsy accusations aside, are there any stronger arguments against Bitcoin in this transcript?
Well, there's this one argument that says a sufficient number of dumb and greedy people could keep Bitcoin's price up, even if it's irrational.
Okay, that's a bold claim. But how do you even prove or disprove something like that?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's where this whole idea of falsifiability comes in.
Okay, so let's use that lens. How could we test if that claim is true?
We'd have to ask ourselves, what would we need to see in the market that would show us Bitcoin's price isn't just driven by, dumb and greedy people?
Can you give a specific example?
Okay, imagine you see a huge increase in institutional investment, right? But not just from hedge funds trying to make a quick profit, but from big established financial institutions that are adding Bitcoin to their long-term portfolios.
Okay, so that would mean there's a deeper level of confidence in Bitcoin's future, right? Not just a bubble about to burst.
Exactly. Or, think about it, what if you see a ton of new technologies being built using the Bitcoin network? And those technologies are actually being used in the real world,
Like that Lightning network I keep hearing about.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. The Lightning network makes Bitcoin transactions faster and cheaper, and if that takes off, it'll be pretty hard to say that Bitcoin's value is only because of speculation.
So by looking at what's happening in the real world, at the trends in the market, we can start to test these claims about Bitcoin just being driven by dumb and greedy people.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the hype and finding evidence that either supports or refutes these claims.
This is getting really interesting, but we've covered a lot already. Let's take a quick break and pick this conversation back up in part 2 of this deep dive.
This is what I find really interesting. This author, they go on to say that maybe just maybe, calling Bitcoin a greater fool game, well, it could actually mean you don't really get it.
Hmm. Okay, so are they saying, like, dismissing Bitcoin as this greater fool thing, that could be a kind of foolishness in itself?
Yeah, in a way. So if someone's just writing Bitcoin off, like totally, just because they think everyone involved is a fool, well, they might be missing the point entirely. It's like, imagine dismissing the internet back in the 90s just because you didn't get how it worked or what it could do, you know?
I see what you mean. So instead of just looking at it through this greater fool lens, like, how else could we try to understand Bitcoin?
Well, one way to think about it is like as a technological innovation, right? So instead of focusing on the price going up and down all the time, we could look at the tech behind it. You know, stuff like cryptography, decentralized networks, blockchain technology, all of that.
Okay, so we'd be shifting our focus from, like, the price action to the actual nuts and bolts of the technology.
Right, exactly. So what kind of questions would we ask then?
I guess we'd be asking things like, how secure is the Bitcoin network? Or how does it compare to, like, traditional financial systems? Is it more efficient, more transparent? And, like, what else can we do with blockchain technology, beyond just cryptocurrency?
Yeah, exactly. We'd be trying to figure out what makes Bitcoin tick, what makes it special, you know?
Yeah, it's like instead of just looking at a shiny car, we're popping open the hood and seeing how the engine works.
Exactly. And of course, we got to talk about Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, right?
Right. So, like, how does that fit in with this whole falsifiability thing?
Well, if Bitcoin really is a hedge against inflation, then its price should go up when inflation is high, right? While other stuff like traditional currencies, they should be losing value.
So we need to look at, like, historical data, see how Bitcoin's price has moved compared to other assets during those times, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we'd want to understand what's driving Bitcoin's price movements, see if it's actually connected to inflation.
So with this falsifiability thing, we can move beyond just, like, gut feelings about Bitcoin, right? We can
Yes.
actually look at real evidence.
Yeah, it's about looking for evidence, testing our assumptions, and always trying to learn more, you know?
Okay, so this is where you, the listener, come in, right?
Yeah.
You got to use your critical thinking skills. Don't just accept any theory about Bitcoin, whether it's the greater fool theory, the tech innovation argument, or the inflation hedge idea. You got to test those claims against real evidence, right?
Absolutely. Look at historical price data. See how blockchain technology is being developed and adopted. Research the arguments for and against Bitcoin. The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
It's like being a detective, right?
Yeah.
You got to examine all the clues and evidence to figure out what's really going on.
Exactly. And you got to be open to following the evidence, even if it leads you somewhere unexpected.
This has been a really insightful conversation so far, but we're just getting started. Stay tuned for part 3 of this deep dive, where we'll keep exploring Bitcoin and what the future holds for it. While we've been talking about this greater fool theory, something's been on my mind. Isn't there, like, always some speculation when it comes to new stuff? New markets, new technologies, all that.
Yeah, you're right. It's tough to completely separate speculation from actual belief, especially when something's just getting started.
Right. Think about the internet back in the 90s. All that hype and speculation, the dot-com bubble, But even with all that craziness, there were people who really saw what the internet could become.
Yeah, and the people who held on to that belief, who weren't just in it for a quick buck, they ended up doing all right.
So how do we apply that to Bitcoin? Like, how do we see past the hype to the real potential value?
Yeah. I think we got to focus on the fundamentals, you know, not get too caught up in the price going up and down every day. Look at the tech. Look at how the whole ecosystem is developing. Look at who's using it, businesses, institutions, all that.
And look at the problems it's trying to solve, right?
Mm.
Can it really make things more efficient, more transparent, more secure? Can it give people more control over their own money?
Exactly. If we focus on those questions, we can get a clearer picture of what Bitcoin could be beyond just the hype.
And that's where falsifiability comes in again, right?
For sure. We got to keep testing what we think we know, see if it matches up with what's actually happening.
So if Bitcoin is really going to change the world, we should see proof of that, right? More developers building cool new stuff, more businesses accepting it, more institutions investing in it for the long term.
And if we don't see those things, well, then we might need to rethink things a bit.
It's about being honest with ourselves, right? Not letting our emotions or biases cloud our judgment.
Exactly. Being willing to admit when we're wrong and change our minds when we learn something new.
And that's where you come in, dear listener, as you explore this whole world of Bitcoin and crypto. Remember, things are always changing. New ideas, New tech, new challenges.
So stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge what you hear, and think for yourself.
Yeah, and never stop learning. The more you know, the better you'll be able to navigate this whole space. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into this whole greater fool question. Hopefully this has given you some food for thought and some tools to help you think critically about this amazing world of Bitcoin and crypto. Thanks for joining us on the Satoshi Chain podcast.